Welcome to the place of rest, where our aim is to give you language that helps you displace the growing confusion, chaos, and dis-ease of our times. My name is Jonathan Boyce, and it's my pleasure to bring to you today's episode. Virginia and I revisit the idea of the invisible string. We dive deeper into how this principle plays out in application. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Virginia, it was fun to be able to have Patrice on the podcast, and I really enjoy her book, The Invisible String. And it was great to take a step back from some of the more serious topics to look at something through the eyes of a simplistic child. And with this idea of the invisible string, not every child has that wonderful, loving connection to a grown-up, to an adult, to a parent, or to their home. And children grow up. We experience things that may break our heart, shatter our soul. So when those things happen, this is a universal principle that can keep us anchored. But when things in life begin to erode our natural affections, what do we do?
Well, it's interesting you bring this up because I was thinking specifically of the series we just finished doing with our first responders. And this invisible string, or the notion, if you will, of the invisible string is this connection we have to one another. And it's a universal principle, right? That we have measures of empathy, of sensitivities, of connection with one another. And we desire, in many ways, each other in very specific ways. And the notion of the invisible string just caused me to think of what caused our first responders, for example, we'll just use them as an example, to choose the professions they did. But that invisible string quickly becomes shattered, especially in the confusion, chaos, and dis-ease of our time. And you bring up a good point. And the point is, what about these early childhood experiences that we have? And this notion of an invisible string is distant, foreign, or we know it's there because we desire each other, but it's so fractured and broken. And you and I know now that that is the basis of trauma, is these early childhood experiences. So you bring up a noteworthy point, but as you well know, I reason everything through the context of rest, which is relational, emotional, and spiritual truth. But beyond the constitution of what the acronym stands for, rest is that universal principle. And in the triad of things that I encourage people to always reason through, because that is how God chose to identify himself as a spirit, a soul, and obviously in the body in the form of Christ. There is this Trinitarian constitution that we're intuitively familiar with because it makes up who we are, because we're made in his image, spirit, soul, and body. So there's this law of nature, as I often reference, that is self-evident, it's obvious, and it speaks to our natural affection. But when that invisible string is fractured, we all intuitively have a sense for it, but when it is fractured, it causes us great confusion, chaos, and dis-ease. But if we know that one universal principle, which is what? Life. The fundamental and universal principle is to create, protect, and advance life. That is a universal principle common to us all. When that life is assaulted in any way, it's egregious to us. It is obvious that we have laws, in other words, to protect what? Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, life. The laws are to protect the procreation, the advancement, and to secure that life. There was a breach in perhaps trust in our early developmental years that compromises that invisible string, but it doesn't diminish its existence, because the invisible string is this notion that, wait, I was meant for more than this. There is more than this. And that's another universal thing.
Thank you for bringing that up. A universal principle is life, to create, protect, and advance life.
Yes. And she intuitively tapped into the fact that the life of Patrice's little boy's heart was terrified it was diminishing in some ways because of separation anxiety. And he was feeling this disconnection with her. And so she, as a mother, intuitively, her natural affection became very distressed. And she did what we all do, is seek answers. How do I advance the life, protect, advance, and secure the emotional life, the psychological life, the life of my little boy's heart? So that's a law of nature. It's universal and it's intuitive to a mom because she's the one that's giving the life. That is natural. Anything that deviates from that is the violation of that universal principle. That's a natural affection. And Patrice, in her book, tapped into this universal principle because she had a desire to do what I just described: protect, advance, secure, nurture the life of her precious son. But the question, and what we began with, is what happens when there's a breach in trust, when there isn't a parent present that can bring enough attention, heart, if you will, mindfulness to the compromised state of their child developmentally. And the reason that's a very important theme is because at the root of a lot of PTSD and at the root of trauma is really a breach in that trust that transpires in the early developmental years of our life. It doesn't take a therapist or a psychologist or a scientist to tell us that. We've experienced that, you and I, and everybody that we know or people they know. We've all had access to understand what I'm saying, that when there's a breach in trust during our developmental years, for any number of reasons, it compromises, if you will, that invisible string, but it does not diminish its existence, nor our knowledge, nor our desire for it.
So one child's response to a traumatic situation, they can come out looking victorious on one end, and another, it could lead to a series of spirals of things going out of control. Is the breach of trust the main factor in that, or what other factors play a part in that?
Thank you for saying that. I think the factors that play a part in a breach, if you will, of the world we live in, which is really having to address these things, is our common humanity. The heart of a man is desperately wicked. And above all else, if we really step back, we really love ourselves. And short of coming to grips with the reality of our own limitations, we're all injured in one way or another from each other's humanity. I guess the Bible calls that sin. And unless a man stops and thinks about his own condition and turns and chooses to live differently, I suppose we can't recover from the injuries or from the fractures in the strings that we share with each other. It's going to be impossible if we do not deal with the reality of our own depravity and how we show up for life and relationships. Because yes, we've had flawed parents. Yes, developmentally things were difficult. Immigrating was difficult. And I can't even imagine the things my parents really went through to bring us to America and the sacrifices they made. I know the stories, but at the end of the day, Jonathan, I can't really imagine what those sacrifices, what it cost them. And there are so many foolish things and fearful things and limited things that my dad did in parenting, but they pale in comparison to the extraordinary things that he did to do what? Protect, to give us life, to protect our life, and to secure our safety. And I think that is the natural affection of a parent. And they show up, right? Our parents do, with everything they have to give us the best they have. And it isn't until I think we come face to face with our own depravity that we see, yeah, perhaps the existential experience or notion of this invisible string that ties us together is ugly, but it isn't until we see our own depravity that we see the beauty in the ashes of our common humanity. And I know it's taken a children's book that is powerful and beautiful and this universal principle. It's brought me so much joy and comfort, and I love reading it to my granddaughter. But as I'm watching her grow and see, and we take inventory of the world around us, wow, where are those strings now? And I think the only way we come to grips with where they are and what they are and what the beauty of those invisible strings look like, I don't think we can really fully appreciate the beauty in our own brokenness until we face our own depravity and forgive ourselves and others.
Mark your calendars for a night of impact at the Rest and Recover America Gala on Thursday, October 9, 2025, at the stunning Villa Tortorea. Join us for an unforgettable evening, a gala celebrating our first responder community and supporting the efforts of Rest and Recover America as they provide life-changing mental health services to first responders. There will be a dinner, special guest speakers, including our keynote speaker, Hedia Miramati Falco, and a silent auction. Tickets are limited, so don't wait. Secure your spot today at the link in the show notes. Together, with your support, we can directly strengthen and expand our mission to restore well-being and renew capacity to thrive for our first responders. Join us for a night of hope, celebration, and giving back. Get your tickets now. I'm thinking of, for example, a friend I was speaking with. They have 2 siblings and all grew up in the same home, same parents, same traumatic type situation or traumatic home. And 2 of the children responded very differently, almost like absolving the parents of all of their things that they did wrong. Yet this one child cannot seem to break free from that, viewing it in a negative light. What is the difference there?
Well, the beauty of it all is that everybody in that family system desires to be seen, heard, and understood, because ultimately they bear the image and the fingerprint of God. So all of them desire to be whole and to be wholly seen and understood and experienced. And that's point number 1. Well, I would say that's the first thing, my first go-to. Secondly, although those siblings grew up in the same home, they're coming from a whole different genetic pool, so to speak, when you take heritage into context. And we always talk about the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 organized in patterns of 3. And then, of course, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 for families that are very large. But the unresolved emotional conflicts of the ancestors come straight down those family lines. And it's in our modules. We really break this down thoroughly with Dr. Cowden. All carry on the exact unresolved conflict of the ancestors that come before them, both in the mother and in the father's side. So there's a complexity to our stories. And that's why we need to extend a lot of grace to ourselves and to each other. Because we grew up in the same home doesn't mean anything other than we're loved and we're given life by the same parents. And providentially, that's where we landed. But if we can learn to become curious and wonder about these mysteries, in other words, why do the 3 of us growing up in the same home think, act completely different? It's because your father is really God. Your origins are very complex, and they go deep into genetic pools. And the narrative of your story in time, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful adventure that you get to step in and discover. And the people whose families you were born into really have a big part in this bigger story as well. But at the end of the day, your brothers and your sisters are your neighbors, are the people you think you're angry with, that you judge all the time, that you resent. The person who's struggling with same-sex identity, this person considering changing their gender, which is impossible. But the person who is getting a divorce, the one that's having an affair, all the people that you look around you and their lives are in shambles that you judge, we need to be really careful, because those are our brothers and our sisters. We're part of this. We're human beings, and we're part of this human family. And our individuality and our uniqueness and our purpose and our meaning and our significance and the mysteries of all that I think, is contained in a fingerprint. There is not two of us that are alike. The only thing that is alike that we share in common with everybody is we have a spirit, a soul, and a body. Independent of that, we share experiences in the context of family systems. And I think that's why Jesus came into time and really nail that lie to the cross, that our brothers and sisters are only contained within a family system. No, no, no. Our brothers and our sisters are contained within this pool of humanity, and we all come in the same way, and we're all going to leave the same way. So sometimes I think we put too much pressure on our moms and our dads and our siblings and our families because we don't understand the framework of these universal principles that are contained in this narrative of rest that we've witnessed has been incredibly instrumental in helping people heal. And what we bear witness of in this framework of rest are universal principles that cannot be denied. And you just named one. Why is it I can feel like a stranger in my own family? And why is it everybody is so different? Because your real family are your neighbors and the people that we're so harsh with often, and other times very kind with, right? It's obvious that people in a family and that all our children are completely different. And it appeals to our natural affection because it's common sense, but none of it can serve us well if we're not willing to look outside of our little stories to the bigger story. And that is that we're all passing through time and having this shared human experience with the privilege and the joy to examine ourselves and develop intimacy and find meaning and love in making connections with one another, not just within the confinements of our family, but with human beings that we encounter. And perhaps that's why Jesus said, I'm going to give you a new commandment, right? The greatest commandment, that you love. But to love requires dying to yourself and putting the needs and the reality of what I just described and how it shows up in human experiences before your I want, I need, and I deserves. I think humanity is finding itself in a beautiful time in the history of the world. Information is so readily available. The highs and the lows of the human experiences are shared in seconds. The tragedy of the depravity of man is communicated so clearly. And we're sharing in each other's experiences, some false by social media posts and things that have no bearing on reality, but some tragic, some life-giving, some life-destroying experiences. And we have to choose what we allow into the portals of our soul to be able to identify these invisible strings that weave really the fabric of our very being together. And I don't know what that takes for different people at different times, but certainly at rest, universally, we find the word hope that emerges. The first description of how they feel or think is hope, because we really try to heal that which has been fractured. We reconcile the conflict and narratives between the spirit, the soul, and the body that really makes it impossible to identify sometimes these invisible strings that bind us together. But the reason that it exists and the reason we hunger for it, because our real desire is for God, our maker, our Father, and the comforter, the teacher, the spirit that guides us, the spirit of truth, that quiet, still voice we hear at night and in the morning, good, bad, or in different times in our life. I believe that's the Holy Spirit that descended upon time. And of course, we have a historic figure that came 4,000 years after ancient documents, very well supported and transcribed ancient documents that survived time, said, I came to bear witness of this whole narrative, this story, that I am the ultimate thread that came to bring you home. I am your lifeline. And it was Jesus. And in studying world religions and studying many narratives, I think the invisible string is that we're made in the image of a personal and intimate God that made us just out of pure love and desire for us. And that caused him to give us choice and free will. And that is what love does. Love releases and love gives choice and free will. And it's such a beautiful love story, really. It's the ultimate invisible string, is that of a creator God that speaks to us and calls us by name and informs us about so many things. And the question is, are we willing to be curious enough and take the time to think deeply about what I just said? And I think that is the beauty, that is the rhythm of life that makes it all glorious, the good, the bad, and the ugly, is that love really gives liberty. Choose.
So then in some ways is the invisible string of love kind of like a kite string that anchors us to the Father, and then we get to go wild and sail in the breeze.
Beautiful picture. I think it is. But man's propensity is to control and manipulate and judge. And we're so cruel with ourselves and each other that we really make that very difficult, both in our lives and in the lives of each other. And it's not tragic because God ultimately created the whole narrative. So if we can manage to extend each other grace and love each other, I think it's a beautiful journey to find the story, the ultimate love story. And that is of our Maker. He knows us by name. He knows every hair in our head. And he's just there with this beautiful destiny for all of us. But we get to choose if we're going to find our identity in him, or choose to find our identity in ourselves and our own accomplishments, or find our identity in the opinions of others. The latter two lead to death. But there's so much life and freedom and healing. And it's a beautiful thing.
What you just described too is also the same matrix as the soul hunger, right? There's
That's
the
right.
soul hunger. There are two things that can satisfy it by the works of the flesh, or there's the one thing that can satisfy it by the work of the Spirit.
Because there is something that heals that string, that causes us, it exposes that string in beautiful, dynamic ways. And there's something that hinders and hides that invisible string and destroys it, actually. And the power is in the thought life of each individual. So there's a beautiful story behind all of this.
We hope listening to this episode has brought you closer to experiencing the freedom of wholeness and healing. If you have questions or comments about today's episode, or for updates about R.E.S.T, please visit our Instagram or Facebook at The Place of R.E.S.T. If you would like more information about Virginia, or to support and join the cause of R.E.S.T, please go to theplaceofrest.com/donate or call 949-289-5935. Thank you for listening to Rest with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.